Hey, Bastish B for 64K and welcome to another episode of Top 10s.
Welcome to 64K, hosted by Bastish B.
And welcome back. So today's list is going to be a little bit different. It's not a top 10, it's actually a top 20. The reason for that is that I'm covering the Commodore 64 arcade conversions. Now, there's a lot of them, like tons and tons. There's some really great ones and there's some really terrible ones, but for the most part there's a ton of great ones. That's the reason why I'm expanding it to a top 20. I just couldn't possibly choose only 10, there's just too many good ones. So for everybody that grew up with 8-bit consoles and computers and even 16-bit, you know how important arcade conversions were to your lifeblood of your machine. Back then, technically, the arcades were way ahead of what home consoles and computers could do. Graphically and sound-wise, they were just far superior. That's why arcade conversions were like the lifeblood of these systems. Many different companies were converting arcade games left, right, and center for everything, because everybody wanted to have the arcade experience in their home, or at least as close to the arcade as your system could allow. So this list isn't restricted to the classic era of Commodore 64 arcade conversions. As long as it's an arcade conversion and it's being put on the Commodore 64, then it qualifies. So whether it was made yesterday or it was made 20 years ago, it's irrelevant. If it's a good arcade conversion, it's probably going to make this list. And as with all these top 10 videos, there will be a short honorable mentions list right before the number one position. And without further ado, let's get this list started.
Number 20.
So this will be my one and only wildcard choice here, which is Rodland, based on the obscure 1990 arcade game by Jalico. This brilliant C64 version was put out by Sales Curve, a very underrated C64 publisher who did a bunch of arcade conversions like the excellent Saint Dragon and Silkworm. Rodland falls into that weird late 80s, early 90s genre of arcade game that mixes platforming, single screen levels, and lots of cute killing all in one, similar to Bobble and Snow Brothers. Your goal is to save your mom that's been imprisoned by a monster at the top of a tower. In this 1 or 2 player romp, you have to smash your way to the top while collecting everything and unleashing all manner of cool power-ups. The graphics are great, really capturing the style of game perfectly, with some nice fluffy modern Walker music and simple addictive gameplay, which is what the best of arcade gaming always had to offer.
Number 19.
Super Offroad was released by Virgin Games in 1990 and programmed by those geniuses at Gold, who also did the great Rainbow Island C64 conversion as well. It's an amazing port of an excellent arcade that makes monster truck racing from this 3¼ view so much fun. Race small, quick tracks, make money, upgrade your truck, repeat. The fast-paced gameplay and great graphics do a fantastic job of imitating the arcade, and more importantly, getting the feel of the trucks just right, even without the steering wheel controller, which is quite a feat. As a big fan of the original arcade, I think they couldn't have done a better job, and a great entry for arcade racing games.
Number 18.
Is a game I pumped a ridiculous amount of quarters into back in the day because of 2 things, Sega and ninjas, and that was enough to satisfy my 80s kid brain. Shinobi was a brilliant platform action game by Sega, released in 1987 and received an amazing C64 port by Virgin Games in 1989. This game proved that you could convert a big flashy arcade game to the C64 without any compromises if you just put the effort into it. Your goal is to rescue your students of a ninja clan that have been taken hostage by a terrorist organization known as Zed. It's a great side-scroller with tons of weapons to pick up and some awesome ninja magic at your disposal to kill everything on screen, Golden Axe style. The graphics are good and the sheer variety of levels and enemies is amazing. The jumping is a little bit fiddly sometimes, but besides that, it's an amazing port. Other awesome Sega games that got great ports on the C64 are Wonder Boy, Turbo Outrun, Golden Axe, Alien Storm, and that's just to name a few.
Number 17.
Next is Rampage, based on the Bally Midway 1986 arcade game, which is a big old giant monster team-up game where destroying the city and everything else was part of the fun. Activision released 2 ports for the C64 based on this game. The UK and US versions are both different games from the ground up made by different teams. The UK version was released in 1987 and was the one I played originally, and is a pretty good adaptation where you choose your monster and went about destroying a city block while fighting the military and maybe even your friend in 2-player mode. Good graphics and sound made it work quite well. In 1989, Activision released the US C64 version, which in my opinion is just the better of the two, although not by much. I feel the controls are just way better in the US version, making it faster to play and easier to smash and grab stuff, which is after all the core of the gameplay. Overall though, both versions are actually very good, so the choice is really yours which one you want to play.
Number 16.
Move over, James Bond, Sly Spy has arrived. Ocean's conversion of Data East 1989 James Bond ripoff Sly Spy Secret Agent is another fantastic example, like Shinobi, where the big powerhouse arcade could be converted to the C64 without compromises. The game is a side-scrolling run and gun, mixed in with some driving, skydiving, and beat-em-up boss battles, and everything that makes Secret Agent movies so cool. Your mission is to prevent a terrorist organization from launching a nuke at the US. The game features tons of different gameplay styles, slick graphics and presentation, and some awesome music by Jeff Folan, brother of Sid legend Tim Folan. Just like the arcade, this game is just pure fun from start to finish.
Number 15.
Like I said in another one of my videos, ninjas were all the rage in the 1980s. You slap them on anything and it would be popular. Fortunately for Ninja Spirit, it was based on the 1988 RM arcade game that was just a rocking side-scroller filled to the brim with explosions and epic boss battles. The game was released on the C64 by Activision and programmed by C64 arcade conversion legend Chris Butler, who made a name for himself converting epic arcade games like Power Drift and Thunderblade to the C64 with great success. And Ninja Spirit was no exception. The game has you on a quest to avenge your father's death and throws every ninja cliche at you rapid fire style. The fast-paced gameplay has you jumping and falling through levels after intense level of mayhem with a brilliant selection of weapons at your disposal and the awesome Ghost Ninja ability where you can have 2 extra versions of yourself on screen to amplify the on-screen destruction. Fantastic graphics and another excellent Martin Walker soundtrack make this a spot-on conversion of the RM arcade game.
Number 14.
Arkanoid is a conversion of the 1986 Taito arcade game that owes its fair share to Atari's breakout. It's the same genre while adding power-ups and other great touches to send it to the next level. Imagine converted it to the C64 in 1987 and they did a fantastic job with it. This genre of gaming usually doesn't hold my interest for too long, but Arkanoid's excellent visuals and abundance of power-ups and great level design really make this stand well above the other games in the genre at the time. And let's not forget that brilliant Martin Galway music, which is loud and thumping and gets you in the mood like any good score should. Zap 64 magazine sang its praises, also scoring it at 80% in issue number 24, and it's still my favorite game in the breakout style genre to this day.
Number 13.
And this is the first of 2 games by a company called Special Effects, this being 1990's Midnight Resistance and released through Ocean based on the 1989 arcade game by Data East. Special Effects made a lot of C64 gems like Firefly, Hudson Hawk, and Batman the Cape Crusader, but this has to be one of their best. The game is a side-scrolling run and gun that has you as part of a resistance movement trying to take down a maniac drug kingpin that has kidnapped your family. Blasting everything in sight is the order your business while collecting keys which can be used to buy new weapons and items at the end of each stage. A really great conversion that features almost everything from the arcade, and they even managed to make the complicated control scheme work so well on the C64. Awesome graphics and good music round out an excellent port of an awesome arcade game.
Number 12.
Alien Syndrome is a wonderfully well-made conversion of a lesser-known Sega arcade that was released in 1987. The C64 port came out in 1988 by Ace. The game is a top-down run-and gun that has you trying to save people being held by aliens. It's basically James Cameron's Aliens movie. Each level has you running and freeing hostages, blasting aliens with all manner of cool weapons and pickups, and facing bosses before going to the next location. The graphics are great, being a very good representation of the arcade, and the title music is fantastic and sets the mood well. It's a pity Ace couldn't do what they did here with their terrible Soldier of Light arcade conversion, but alas, at least we got this gem that also scored a whopping 90% in Zap 64 magazine in issue number 38.
Number 11.
Next is Operation Wolf, released in 1988 by Ocean, and it's based on the excellent light gun style game that came out in 1987 by Taito. After watching the movie Invasion USA with Chuck Norris and his dual-wielding Uzi submachine guns, I came across this beast in the arcade and was in absolute awe. The game has 6 stages where you attempt to save your captured friends. Okay, this is pretty much a standard arcade plot at this point. From a terrorist organization. God, those guys were busy in the 80s. Each stage is jam-packed with helicopters, boats, vehicles, terrorists, innocent civilians, etc. And the level ends once you have killed enough of each type of enemy indicated at the bottom of the screen. Despite the initial version of this game not supporting a light gun, it still plays exceptionally well with the joystick, and the graphics are an impressive duplication of the arcade, and it has a wonderful title tune as well by Jonathan Dunn, who did the classic Platoon tune for Ocean as well. And I just want to stop here for a second and talk about Atari Soft. This was a company set up by Atari themselves to do conversions to other computers. Atari never dealt with that kind of thing. They stuck to their own systems primarily. And when I say conversions, I would say 90% of the Atari Soft releases between 1983 and 1984 were arcade conversions. And not only were those restricted to Atari arcade games that they were porting, but they were also doing stuff for Namco, Bally Midway, etc, etc. So all of these conversions were of classic arcade games. I'm talking about the early 80s era. So none of these actually made it into my top 20 list. It doesn't mean I don't like them. I just preferred arcade games that were made a little bit later. Those were my personal favorites, but these are excellent, so let's check them out. So here are 8 Atari Soft games in no particular order that are worth a look. Track and Field is based on the Konami arcade game and is a fun, well put together conversion. Not quite as good as Hypersports, the sequel, but still quite fun. Centipede is a spot on conversion of the Atari arcade game. If you've never played it before, it's basically Space Invaders on PCP. Dig Dug, the Namco 1982 gem, is pretty good. It's missing details here and there, like most early C64 ports, but still holds up well gameplay wise. Donkey Kong is one of those rare times that a Nintendo game appeared on another system, but this conversion is quite excellent and very faithful to the source material. Jungle Hunt was a great conversion of the Taito 1982 hit. I used to play this game a ton at a dodgy local beachfront arcade, and the conversion is pretty accurate. Miss Pac-Man is a fantastic port of Namco's 1981 game. The attention to detail is great, and it even includes the intermission animations, which usually got axed from older conversions. Robotron 2084 is a fast-paced and manic as the 1982 Williams arcade game. And lastly is Pole Position, another 1982 Namco game. That's conversion is actually pretty dodgy, but it's here for pure nostalgia reasons, as it was the first game I ever played with my grandfather, and the fact that he managed to blow up the car literally in seconds on his first race always brings a smile to my face.
Number 10.
And yeah, we have the second awesome arcade conversion by the guys from Special Effects called Cabal, which came out in 1989 by Ocean based on the Taito arcade game from 1988. The game followed the tradition of military shoot-em-ups that dominated 80s arcades, with your character seen from a third-person perspective, blowing up everything that appears on screen, including all the background objects, which the C64 version managed to replicate excellently. Of note, there are again 2 C64 versions of this game, and this glowing review is based on the excellent UK version of the game and is not to be confused with the dire US version, which simply doesn't hold a candle to the quality of this one and should be avoided at all costs. The graphics are detailed, colorful, and jam-packed with action, and it even manages to retain the arcade 2-player option.
Number 9.
1998's release of R-Type for the C64 by Electric Dreams was an amazing conversion of RM's 1987 arcade shoot-'em-up classic. The game was put together in a matter of weeks by German programming genius Manfred Trenz, and if you want to know the whole story behind it, check out my documentary on the man himself. The C64 really manages to do the look and feel of the arcade justice, and it plays really well, and is just the right amount of challenging without being too annoying like a lot of C64 shooters can be. The arcade brought a lot of innovations to the genre, like the charging mega shot, detachable pod, and the massive boss characters, and all that makes it into this fantastic version. And let's not forget the music by Chris Hulsbeck, which I think is actually better than any of the arcade tunes. There's a lot of good C64 arcade converted shoot-'em-ups like Slapfight, Nemesis, Salamander, and Super Zaxxon, but this for me is just the one I'll always come back to.
Number 8.
We have the Ikari Warriors conversion by Elite to the C64 in 1988 based on SNK's 1986 arcade run-and-gun military shoot-'em-up. This excellent conversion was handled by coder John Twitty, who also worked as Magic on the first two Last Ninja classics on the C64. This game was played so much back in the day, especially in 2-player mode, which this version retains and has all the chaotic magic that made the arcade such a hit. My favorite part was jumping in a tank and just going on a total rampage before jumping out and using the burning tank as a bomb. It's just classic stuff. The graphics are nice and detailed, and the action never becomes unfair, so making it to the end was totally achievable. Again, there were two versions of this game on the C64, a UK and a US version. This review is based on the excellent UK version and not the amateur hour US version that looks and sounds like it was programmed by a 3-year-old. My god, is it embarrassing. Zap64 gave this gem an 89% overall in issue number 35, and it's definitely in my top 3 2-player games on the C64.
Number 7.
It's time for the 1987 Capcom arcade classic Bionic Commando to make its appearance, which was converted by Go in 1988 to the C64. In typical 80s arcade style, your mission is to infiltrate a mad terrorist organization's base and stop their plans to launch some missiles. The good old cut and paste arcade plot, I guess. It's essentially a platform game without jumping, but instead you use your bionic arm to swing around and kill everybody while collecting various power-ups. Disclaimer time, this review is based on the UK version, which is great with awesome in-game music by Tim Foland, fast gameplay, and colourful a bit chunky graphics, but just overall a great conversion all round. This game also has 2 C64 versions, and the god-awful US version is almost as bad as the US Ikari. It's slow and plays terribly with bland graphics and some of the worst gaming music I've ever heard. Just avoid it at all costs and play the excellent UK version instead.
Number 6.
1987's Combat School or Boot Camp in the US was based on a Konami arcade game and released by Ocean. It's kinda like their track and field series except with military training exercises. There are 7 major disciplines plus 1 bonus mission. They are Obstacle Course, Shooting Gallery, Iron Man Race, Shooting Gallery 2, Arm Wrestling, Shooting Gallery 3, Close Quarters Combat, and the bonus mission, which is rescue civilians who have been taken hostage. This is definitely one of the games that is going to snap your joystick, so fair warning. The event styles and the gameplay switches are pulled off real well in this game. Music by Martin Galway is excellent, especially that opening tune with its hard thumping beats. The graphics overall are really good and detailed and retain that look from the arcade. A fantastic arcade conversion to check out.
Number 5.
Next is the fantasy hack and slash Gauntlet, released by Atari in 1985 in the arcades, and published by US Gold in 1986 on the C64. This is another excellent two-player game that retains everything from the arcade except the voice samples, which the C64 was more than capable of doing. In this action dungeon exploration game, you fight your way through level after level of demons and monsters, all the while looting for treasure and scavenging for food to keep yourself alive. The C64 version's graphics are a pretty good representation of the arcade classic, and Ben Daglish lent a nice rendition of the arcade music to the game as well. With 512 levels to explore, you better start that tape loading. You're gonna be here for a while. And here we got 1987's Buggy Boy converted by Elite based on the 1985 Tatsumi arcade racing game. And this is pure arcade racing bliss at its best. Race your buggy on the 4 different off-road tracks against the clock. The graphics are much smaller than the arcade but are well animated and extremely colorful. And the game moves at a cracking pace considering all the obstacles that are thrown at you. And that's the charm of this game. Trying to avoid so much death while still keeping on track makes it just so much fun. As far as all the arcade racing games I've replayed for this video, like Road Blasters, Let's Storm, Spy Hunter, and countless more, this still holds up the best in terms of gameplay, which is easy to control but hard to master, but most importantly it's just damn fun to play. And if you want to see where it placed on my top 10 C64 racing games list, then check out that video for more details.
Number 3.
Now let's jump over to the original Commodore 64 version of Commando by Elite, released in 1985. Yes, the same year as the arcade. Elite, the company, were no stranger to arcade conversions either, as they were gonna prove time and time again with C64 conversions of Paperboy, Space Harrier, and the UK version of Ikari Warriors. They tasked Chris Butler to program the game, and he was responsible for later C64 gems like 720 Degrees, Battleships, Ghosts and Goblins, and Power Drift. So to say they had chosen the right guy for the job was an understatement. Not only did he get the look of the game really close to the arcade, but it played, in my opinion, slightly better, with the relentless fast-paced action really fully intact. The negatives are that the game is really short, and only has 3 of the 8 arcade levels, and can be completed in about 5 minutes. Having said that, Elite did insist that Chris make the game a single loader, which means the entire game had to be loaded to memory. Therefore, including all 8 levels would have been kind of impossible without making the game multi-loader, which Elite was not fond of at the time, also seen as their excellent but also level-missing version of Ghosts and Goblins proved. Fortunately, somebody hired the C64's Sid Beethoven himself, Rob Hubbard, to do the music, and boy did he deliver. His tune is an extended and vastly superior version of Tamiya Fujiwara's arcade track that is absolutely brilliant, and was completed in less than a day. Now that's efficiency. The game itself has great graphics and animation. Using the spacebar to throw grenades is a little bit awkward, and the game does suffer from some slowdown and sprite flickering, but overall it's a really well implemented fun version of the arcade game that is admittedly short, but well worth your time. And as much as I love that version, and without it the newer C64 version would not exist, I still have to give the number 3 spot to the later. 2015 was the year the group Nostalgia released their redo of the 1985 version of Commando and tried to make it a much closer version of the arcade than the original was. If you don't know who Nostalgia is, it's a C64 cracking group that cracks games and makes awesome demos for the C64 demo scene community, and they were formed by Zyron and Mr. Alpha in 1995. So what makes this C64 version so good compared to the already well done original? Well, let's start with the fact that they now have all 8 levels from the arcade intact, a brilliant new title screen, tons of in-game graphical enhancements such as the helicopter from the original arcade version, and they've sorted out the slowdown, and most importantly they've mapped the grenades to a longer press of the fire button, Who Dares Wins 2 style, making the game much easier to control. Naturally, also being a cracking group who've got an excellent selection of built-in cheats for you to use or ignore at your whim. It's quite an amazing job they have done here, and it really is an impressive upgrade. Now the only thing they did wrong was try to remix Rob Hubbard's original music track, and that was not the best of ideas. It just doesn't sound right, but luckily you get the choice of the remix music or the original, so maybe even they weren't that confident in their own remix themselves. Overall though, it's a brilliant version that is a must play.
Number 2.
Elite were no strangers to quick arcade conversions, as proved by 1942, Bomb Jack, and many others that they pumped out in record time. Ghosts and Goblins came out in less than a year after the arcade debut, and Elite tasked Chris Butler again with the conversion, no doubt based on his lightning fast conversion of Commando a year earlier. Again, like Commando, Elite wanted the game to be a single loader, so what that meant was sacrifices needed to be made. And just like Commando, the game is missing a few levels, but overall it's still an amazing 8-bit version of the arcade powerhouse. Chris again managed to get the look and feel of the game extremely close to the arcade, which was quite a feat at the time. I got this game for my 11th birthday and managed to load up the tape version before school that morning and got a couple games in, and boy was I impressed. This time around they got Mark Cooksey to do the honors of the music, and it's actually not the same as a Sakamori's arcade track, but it's its own brilliant beast that only the C64 SID audio chip could provide. Fantastic stuff. Considering the fact that this game was a single loader, it manages to pack a lot of the game into a small amount of memory, and is definitely one of the top 10 C64 arcade conversions that every Commodore 64 owner should play. And like I just said for the previous entry, this version is classic in every respect, but my choice for number 2 goes to Nostalgia's other arcade update. Nostalgia did it again with this 2015 redo of the Elite original Commodore 64 version, dubbed the Ghosts and Goblins Arcade. Just like their redo of Commando, the attention to detail is amazing, from the new title screen which adds all the missing details from the arcade back, graphical enhancements on every level. All 8 arcade levels are now included, new music for every stage, and the original arcade intro has been recreated. And with Nostalgia being a cracking group, you now have a full page of cheats to activate before playing, which with this game you may actually need. I really love that they included many of the monsters and bosses missing from the original, and it makes the game way harder, but it also makes the game feel complete. And for that, I applaud them. Here's hoping that they'll tackle Elite's mediocre 1942 conversion next, and maybe give it the conversion it actually deserved. Overall though, Nostalgia did an amazing job on the graphics, and adding new music to each level is really nice. Even though the tracks aren't as memorable as Mark Cooksey's original theme, there is a lot of them, and the variation is really appreciated. Okay, let's just stop here for a second, and before we look at the number 1 game, let's look at 5 honorable mentions. These games are really good and just didn't make the list. Okay, so first up is Hypersports. This is a fantastic arcade conversion. It's based on the Konami arcade game. It is a sequel to Track and Field. Track and Field also got a Commodore 64 conversion, although it's not as good as Hypersports. This is just way better. This is an excellent multi-event sports game. If you like that genre, you're gonna love it. Okay, and next is Ya Kung Fu. This is also based on a Konami arcade game. It's a great conversion. It's a fun versus one-on-one fighting game. I played this a ton in the arcades as a kid. The Commodore 64 version is really well done. It's really fast. It's got cool music, and it's definitely worth checking out. Okay, so we got more Kung Fu action with Kung Fu Master based on the 1984 RM arcade classic. This is a pretty good conversion. The graphics are a bit chunky, but if you can look past that, it manages to capture the arcade really well. I played this game a ton in the arcade and on the Commodore 64 version as a kid. It's got all the levels and it's totally worth checking out. And this is another Konami arcade conversion based on 1985's Green Beret. It's also known as Russian Attack. This is a side-scrolling run and gun kind of game. It is super difficult on the Commodore 64, actually so was the arcade. It also sports some awesome music and it's totally worth checking out if you're up for a challenge. And last but not least is the almost impossible conversion of Sega's 1985 arcade game Space Harrier. Somehow they managed to bring this behemoth to the C64. This was programmed by Chris Butler, mentioned him before on this list. This is another one of the excellent Elite conversions. I know a lot of people in the C64 community don't like this game. They think it's garbage. I think it's pretty damn well done. If you consider the speed of it and the way it flows, it feels a lot like the arcade as well, which is amazing. Chris Butler did a fantastic job, and this is definitely one you should check out, even if it's just for curiosity's sake. Okay, now let's take a look at my personal favorite Commodore 64 arcade game. And here it is, my number one on the C64. And with all my lists, this is purely based on the amount of fun and time spent on the game. And 1987's Firebird release conversion of Bobble takes the spot for me. This excellent conversion is based on the platform Q-em-up Taito arcade game from 1986. And just like Rodland we saw earlier, which was clearly inspired by this game, you as Bub and Bob have to rescue your girlfriends from a giant cave monster. Okay, rescue arcade plot, check. Wait, no terrorists this time? Thank God. Firebird were a London, UK based software developer and distributor that usually didn't do arcade conversions if you look at their broad gaming history, although they did a bunch of conversions of lesser known arcade shoot 'em ups like P-47 Thunderbolt, Flying Shark, Mr. Heli, and Action Fighter. Bubble just seemed a little bit out of place for them, but for whatever reason they just hit it out of the park with this conversion. The music is a wonderful and even better rendition than the arcades in my opinion. The graphics managed to capture the look very well, and all 100 levels are present from the arcade. And let's not forget the game's greatest feature, its 2-player mode, which is fully intact and is an absolute blast to play. The C64 also got the very good arcade sequel Rainbow Islands converted to much praise by Graft Gold, who we saw earlier with their excellent Super Offroad port. Bub and Bob the characters were so popular they even spawned their own spin-off series, Puzzle Bobble, which is highly addictive in its own right. Zap 64 magazine also gave the game a gold medal award, their highest honor, and a 97% overall. So like I've said in the video, when it comes to arcade games, simplicity and addictiveness are the most important factors, and for Bobble, it just delivers. And that's it. What are my overall impressions of the Commodore 64 arcade conversions? I think for the most part they are done pretty well. There's a lot of different companies who are making a lot of different conversions. Obviously there were a few that jumped ahead of everybody else. Elite were extremely good. US Gold put out some really good stuff, even Activision. So there's a whole bunch of companies, lots of companies that did arcade conversions, so it's hard really to pin down who did the best stuff. I think for most of the best arcade conversions on the C64, the developers understood that the gameplay, they had to match the gameplay to the arcade, and if they got that right, the graphics didn't have to be exactly the same, but if they got that gameplay just to feel perfect, just like the arcade, then you've actually got that arcade experience. And I think the best games, the best arcade conversions on the C64 were ones that qualified like that. There's obviously also a lot of bad conversions as well. Don't ever play the original Double Dragon on the C64, it's absolutely awful. For the most part though, I think a lot of developers did a pretty good job, especially considering the limitations of the system. And thanks for joining me, BastishB at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.